Hello! In today's video, I'm going to show you my brand new set of Procreate brushes. I've made them specifically to create beautiful watercolor doodles and abstract art on your iPad, and I really couldn't be more excited about them. The whole set contains 24 brushes, and they are all unique in their textures and functionality. The best thing is that you won't need any stamp brushes to create the most stunning and realistic watercolor effects. I've carefully crafted each brush from high-resolution watercolor textures that I've painted myself, which makes these brushes super satisfying to use. The set also comes with 5 different textured pre-made canvases and 4 color palettes. And for the first time ever, I've created a watercolor painting practice sheet. This will help you get the most out of these brushes, and I will show you how it works a little later in this video. But first, let's have a look at the brushes. There's a total of 24 brushes in the whole set, and the first 2 brushes are doodles brushes. They're meant to create organic looking doodles such as these lines or the little dots you can see here. The organic doodles brush is quite smooth, and then the doodles edge brush has little irregularities, and it's very useful if you want to enhance the dried edges of your watercolor piece a little bit like this. The set contains 5 different wash brushes, and each of these brushes create a very slight watercolor wash effect, and they also create a dried edge when you paint with them. What's important is that when you paint with these brushes that you don't lift up the Apple pencil while you paint to create a continuous line like this. This one is that watercolor soft wash brush, which doesn't have much texture and is a little bit lighter than the watercolor wash brush. Next up we have that canvas wash brush, which has a slight canvas texture on it. Then we have the gouache wash brush, and this is a little bit darker in texture, sort of representing more of the wash painting style. And then we also have an intense wash brush, and as the name suggests, this brush is quite a lot more intense and puts quite a lot more color on your canvas. This brush also lends itself to create floral shapes because it has some really nice streaky characteristics to it, and it creates these beautiful streaks here. Next up in the set are 5 pattern brushes. They're similar to the wash brushes, but they just have a lot more of a pattern to them. The first one is the watercolor pattern brush, and as you paint you will see how this watercolor pattern here gets revealed. Next up we have the shadow texture brush, and this brush creates a lot of texture. This is quite dark, so this really lends itself to be used with the lighter colors because it's got so much texture to it, but of course you can use it with darker colors as well, and it creates a really beautiful texture like this. Then we have the salt sprinkles brush, which is really fun because it creates little salty sprinkles. So it's also got the watercolor texture, but then every now and then it's got these little salt sprinkles that come through. Then we have the moonscape brush, and this really creates this moonscape looking shape and just gives your painting a little bit more character. And then we also have that water shape brush, and this brush is a lot lighter, and this kind of resembles putting water on the page with just a little bit of color, but it still creates the dried edge at the end. And as with all these brushes, you want to keep your Apple pencil on the canvas and just keep drawing so that it creates a continuous line. The next 2 brushes are called Flow State and Light Water, and these are more of your traditional painting brushes. This is what you would use to just put color on the page and paint. And the Flow State brush is quite heavily loaded with paint. It's pressure sensitive, so the harder you press down, the more color it produces. And then with light pressure, it only creates light colors. And you can even smudge the colors around a little bit on your canvas as you paint. This brush is really a lot of fun, and I've spent so much time trying it out. And if you find this brush a little bit too intense, we also have the light water brush. This is a lot lighter and adds a lot less color to your canvas. So this is really useful if you just want to add some water to your canvas. If you put more pressure on, it also adds more color, but it's a lot more subtle than the Flow State brush. And this is really nice if you want to have your colors fizzled out like this and just create this really nice smooth transition as well. And then here we have 2 special blending brushes that really shine when you use them with the smudge tool. Of course you can use them to paint too, but they are most satisfying to use with the smudge tool. Let me show you. The wet water blend brush is very smooth and just creates the most divine blend. Out of this whole set, this is the brush I've used the most so far, just because it's so nice to use. I'm going to choose a different color, and I'm going to show you how the blending works. So it doesn't blend if you use the brush with the brush tool, but now if we switch to the smudging tool, and you can do that by long tapping on the smudge tool, and then it'll automatically select the same brush. And now we can blend these two colors together, and it just creates this most beautiful and satisfying effect. And then we also have a texture blend brush, and I thought it was important to make two different blending brushes, because sometimes having a smooth blend is not really what you want. Sometimes you actually want the more textured blending, depending on the brush that you've used for painting. This is how it works when you paint with it. It's also pressure sensitive, of course. So now we're going to use it for smudging. And so now you can smudge these two colors together. And sometimes what I like to do as well is tap. And so then it creates a more organic blend, and it just looks a little bit more natural. So this really helps you blending in colors where you want to preserve the texture. And then the wet water blend brush is great for when you want to create a smooth blend. And then the blooming edge brush is a bit of a special brush that I've created to create the blooming edges around your shapes. And so you can draw in the dark edges a little bit like this. And it just creates ever so slightly random darker edges like this. If you find that this is a little bit too intense, then of course you can also use the Doodles edge brush. So depending on the application and on the shape that you have, you can use one of the two brushes to create your dried edges like this. Or you can even use a combination of the two as well. And then we also have 6 textured overlay brushes. And the reason why I called them overlay is because they're best used with blend mode overlay and a black color. And I'm going to show you later on how this works. I just want to show you the brushes themselves first, because you can use them by themselves as well, of course, especially if you want to color in the corners of your artwork. It just creates a really nice texture like this. So this is the fine texture overlay brush. Next off, we have the alcohol ink overlay brush. And this is very cool. It creates this alcohol ink effect with some darker spots and some lighter spots. And of course, these brushes are pressure sensitive as well. So if you try them out, definitely use lighter pressure and also some heavier pressure to see all the textures that you can create. And then we have the dry sponge overlay. So this is a dry brush, and it just lets you add some little dry textures. And you can use this to give your artwork a little bit more texture and make it stand out a little bit more. And then we have the cloud texture overlay brush, which creates this super nice irregular cloud texture. It really lends itself to color in the corners of your artwork to use with your hand lettering in the middle. It also looks fabulous when you mix it with different colors and lets you create invitation templates or backgrounds for your Instagram quote. Next up is the intense texture overlay brush, and it is really living up to its name, creating these beautiful intense watercolor splatters and textures. I use this brush mostly with blend mode overlay on top of my watercolor shapes, but you can definitely use it on its own as well. And similarly with the salty texture overlay brush, it is quite intense as well, but it also adds little light and dark splatters that you would see when adding salt to your wet watercolors. Last but certainly not least, of course we also need a splatters brush for that extra little bit of magic. This brush is pressure sensitive, so you can add larger splatters by pressing down more, or finer splatters with lighter pressure. So now let's look a little bit closer at the canvas as well. If you open up the layers panel, you'll see a layer group here that's called watercolor paper, and that it's locked. And I've locked this so that you don't accidentally paint on it. But you see that it's got quite a few different layers that add the paper texture, that add the contrast. And then I've also added a layer that adds a little bit of a fiber effect. And of course you can turn each of these layers off if you don't like the effect, but I very much recommend that you leave this on for the best results. And then there's a layer here that says paint here, and this is where you start painting. Any layer that you create, you will need to create below your watercolor paper layer. So you can just add new layers and then paint on any of them. But now let's have a look at the practice sheets. Because these brushes are so versatile and they can be a little bit overwhelming when you first start working with them, I thought it would be a good idea to show you how you can practice using the brushes. And so I made these practice sheets. They are also on the watercolor paper, of course, and they have a paint here layer. So this is where we're going to start. And I recommend that you do this practice with quite a dark color. And this is now a good time to introduce the color palettes that come with the set as well. So we've got 4 different color palettes. One's called Watercolor Doodles. We have the Coast palette, which has some blue and green colder tones. we have the forest palette, which has some earthy tones, and then we have the cherry blossom palette, which has some pinks and reds and greys. For this practice, I'm going to use the dark blue color of IPL Coast. This is almost black, but you'll see when we paint, it's actually sort of a bluish gray color, and it really lends itself for this exercise. So now what you want to do is start with your Watercolor Wash brush here. We're not going to use the Doodles brushes because they're pretty self-explanatory, but we're going to use all the painting brushes. So we're going to start with Watercolor Wash, and you'll see that the brushes have a default size set here as well, and so you can just leave it at that size. And so now the way it works is that for each of these brushes, we're going to use them with light pressure, with medium pressure, with hard pressure, and then we're also going to use them with a light pressure first and then move to a more harder pressure. So you can see all the effects you can achieve by just varying the pressure a little bit. And when I say light pressure, I really mean barely touching the iPad. So what you want is to create almost a black square here, like this. And then with medium pressure, you can start putting a little bit of pressure on. And now you see that you get a slightly lighter swatch, but you should still see all your black edges. And then when you use hard pressure, the brush might get too big. So what you want to do here now is you want to decrease the brush size. I've set it to 14% now. And so now you really want to press down really hard to see the difference between the lightest and the hardest pressure. So now the inside is quite light, but you still got your dark edge on the outside. And so now let's see what happens if we use some light pressure first, and then we increase the pressures as we go along. So again, start with barely touching the iPad for really light strokes. And then as you go and you close your shape, start adding pressure. And so now you can create this beautiful texture, almost like a bit of a texture gradient as well. And then you want to continue painting swatches with different pressure for all the brushes in the set. Remember that for this exercise, you want to keep drawing a continuous shape without lifting the Apple Pencil off the iPad. You will notice that with the lightest touch, all the brushes here almost look the same. But as you start adding pressure, they reveal their different characteristics. And this is what makes them so versatile and nice to use. Now we are getting to our painting brushes, and they work almost the opposite. When you use light pressure, only a tiny bit of color gets added to the canvas, and it looks like you're mostly painting with water. And then the more you press down, the more color gets added. And this is exactly why we're doing this exercise, so you can learn all the characteristics of each brush, and then you know exactly which brush to use for your artwork. For the light and hard pressure exercise, you want to try and create a color gradient going from dark to light, almost like you would with real watercolor. And then you also want to practice with that blooming edge brush, because I think it's quite important that you get familiar with the characteristics of this brush too. Of course, it's a little bit hard to fill in the shape, but you can maybe make some zigzags like this with light pressure. And then when you add more pressure, you'll see how the blooms become quite a bit bigger, but the lines also get a bit softer. And then here, when we try and create a gradient, it becomes very apparent that the lines are much softer with more pressure and get more defined as you take pressure off. Once you finish this part of the exercise, go back to the first page, and now let's have some fun with colors and textures. First up, we are going to paint in some color and blend it with our swatches. In order to do that, open the layers panel, create a new layer above your color swatches but below the watercolor papers, and then add a clipping mask. This will make sure that we are only painting on the swatches and not anywhere else on the canvas. Now let's select a nice color. I think this pink color from the Cherry Blossom palette will work nicely. The brush I'm going to use for this is that Flow State brush, because it will let you add quite a bit of color quite quickly. And then we're going to use our water blend brush with that smudge tool to blend these colors together. This is probably my favorite part of the whole exercise. I just love how the colors blend into each other on the canvas. And also with that blend brush, try different brush sizes and different pressure to get a feel for the best blend. Then we're going to add another new layer and change the blend mode to overlay and select the black color. Now it's time to finally try our overlay brushes. Let's start with the Salty Texture Overlay brush first. And so now we can start adding some textures here to your shapes. And again, I recommend that you try different brush sizes and just see what kind of effect that you can get. I think it works quite well if you start painting in the middle of full shapes, and then you can create some darker corners here. Or you can also start from the outside of your canvas and then move the brush towards the shape. and then create these really nice effects. And of course, here it got a little bit dark, so I don't like it too much. So now I'm going to try again and use a little bit less pressure, and then it creates a bit of a nicer effect. So now what you want to do is do the same thing with all your texture overlay brushes. And so you create a new layer, you turn the visibility of this layer off, change that blend mode to overlay, and so now you can try the same thing again. So you can use the intense texture overlay brush, and we're going to try this now. And so this creates quite a dramatic effect here, which is super cool, of course. And so now you might say, yeah, but your colors are really dark, it doesn't really look like watercolor anymore. And of course you're right. So there's two things you can do about this. So the first thing is change the opacity of your underlying layer. So you can turn this down a little bit, and you can see now that it immediately becomes a little bit more washed out, and it creates a bit more of that watercolor texture. But if you don't want to do that, what you can do as well is actually change the color of all these swatches. So you're going to go to adjustments, go to hue, saturation and brightness, and so now you can dial the colors up a little bit. Maybe make them a little bit brighter, and you can also change the hue. Maybe if you don't like the blue so much and would prefer more purple, you can do that, or maybe change it to green or any other color you like. I do actually like the blue, so I'm going to leave it there. Just add a bit more saturation and a little more brightness, and so now it already looks quite different. You can also completely change the color as well, of course, but these are just some adjustments you can make. And then another thing you can do now is add some more textures above. And so this time, if we want to make it lighter rather than darker, we're going to use the add blend mode. And for this, you want to choose a medium light color. Maybe this bright pink here will look nice. And then we're going to try out the cloud texture overlay brush. And now we can just paint in some of these highlights. And you can see that this immediately brightens up our textures and adds some new interesting highlights to our swatches. And then let's try that salty texture with this as well. This always comes out nice. And if you find that this is a bit too intense, what you can do is either use a darker pink color, so then it's not quite as intense, or of course you can also turn down the opacity of your layer to dial down the effect of your blend mode. And there you have it. This was a quick overview of my brand new Watercolor Doodles and Abstract art brushes. And yes, of course, I'm going to make many more tutorials using this brush set. So definitely subscribe to my channel if you're interested in learning more about the brushes. The download link for the brushes is in the description of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.